Our next presenter is Laurence Penney. Laurence's day job is in font technology. However, around 15 years ago, he started collecting maps that focus on a single particular route. The subjects, therefore now numbering in their thousands, are roads, rivers, railways, flight paths, and so on. Therefore, also, they come in a wide range of formats. Hopefully, Laurence's collection will provide the source material for a website which will focus on the whole matter of one-dimensional maps. So over to you, Laurence, to share with us now.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'll dive straight in. And yeah, first slide, please. So what I want to show you today, you can read the title in French on the top of it. It's basically Carte spéciale des chemins de fer et télégraphes de Belgique. In English, that's a special map of railways and telegraphs of Belgium and neighbouring countries. I picked this up very cheaply on an auction site about a year ago. Just fascinated by the schematic diagram. It didn't even mention the date in the advert. But I want to show you why I think it's going to be of interest, not just to fans of maps of Belgium or 19th century railway maps, but I think it's of interest to historians of information design and schematic maps in general. And I have not seen it discussed in the literature, so I'd be very interested if anybody else has. So what do we have? It's a schematic map of the Belgian railway network, dated 1859, which is a lot earlier than I had assumed it was by looking at it. It's signed by somebody called Eugène Leloup, and it's pretty large. It's about 75 centimeters in its printed area across, 45 roughly up and high. So it's shows the network in a simplified schematic style, which I think itself is remarkable. If we consider that 1859 date, that's 74 years before Beck's Underground map was published. It's also 10 years before Minard's famous Napoleonic march to Moscow and back, although Minard was already working at this time. So we've got the network map as the main feature. Bottom left, we've got an overview map, geographic map of Belgium and the neighbouring countries. Then bottom right inset, we've got Belgium itself, again roughly just a bigger scale, but it's not distorted in any obvious way. And that also shows the telegraph network, and there's a schedule of telegraph prices in a table on the bottom left. That's the prices of your telegraphs. But I want to focus on the main schematic. So what it has on the roughly on the left 2/3 of the schematic is routes from London and Paris. So effectively, we have got an east-west orientation. Curiously, you might be able to see you've got multiple versions of London, at least 4 that are obvious there, and even more instances of Paris. I lost count actually because they get small. They're smaller and smaller versions of Paris. In the about 2/3 of the way across, you've got a vertical line which includes at least 4 versions of Brussels. So that's obviously their sort of fulcrum, their center of the map. On the east, you've got Amsterdam and Cologne. You've also got a compass rose on the largest of the Brussels. Again, rather interesting for a schematic map. And yeah, it's roughly in the right orientation, so that's good. Now, what does the scale at the top mean? So you see these vertical gradations all across the map. Now, if we go to if we align it with Brussels on the top, so if we scroll right a bit, thanks, Tom, we can see that that's the 0 point. If we get to Brussels and 0, we see that the first, if we start the main scale, it's big zero in the middle. So that's 0 leagues or lieues from Brussels. So this map is using the convention that 5 kilometers make a league. So you've got a kilometer scale a bit lower down. So 5 is with 25. But then you've also got a red scale and a black scale above the distance scale. And if we zoom into those, we'll see they're marked in hours. So we actually have a sort of a scale between distance and time there. So that the cartographer is assuming a constant speed of 2 types of train. The red being the expresses, and I calculated that they run at 47 kilometers per hour. The black trains being ordinary trains, I calculated they run at 35 kilometers per hour. So there were no fast stretches of track or slow stretches of track, or if they are, they're marked as red and black. Some other features in that bit you've got cropped right now, Tom, is you see 2 versions of Antwerp, Anvers on the left and another Anvers on the right. So that's 2. This schematic is pretty distorted. So yeah, a pretty ambitious effort, and maybe rather too complicated for the general viewer, maybe over ambitious. But certainly, I consider this an incredible achievement for so early, and I'm surprised not to have seen it in the literature. Anyway, I'd love to know if any of you have come across anything similar. Certainly, anything more that's around the same period. Yeah, and it's, as I say, it's at least 20 years earlier than I thought it would be. Would have expected it to be 1870s, 1880s, around the same time as Etienne Jules Marey was doing his numerous presentations that connected time and distance, or Edward Muybridge, these people that were fascinated with the increased speeds that were possible, probably provoked by railways themselves. Yeah, okay, I think that's all I have. So there's the people the cartographer is given as Eugène Leloup, who I think was born in 1814 in France, close to the Belgian border, possibly a student of Ingres, the artist. And also credited is Philip van der Meulen, who ran the Établissement Géographique de Bruxelles, which was one of the great Belgian mapping organizations, the great one of the 19th century. So it's a co-production between that organization and the Belgian Railway Company. So I'll leave it there. If there's time for questions now, I'm happy to take them, or I'll be around to the end as well. There are some more zoomed pictures if you want to tab through them, Tom, but you've done a great job of zooming into the highlights.
So Laurence, I have a question. Are we to assume then that the different placement, let's take Paris as an example, and so to the degree to which Paris is further to the left, that means that it takes longer from Brussels to get to Paris?
Yes, so I could have gone into more detail about that. So there are multiple routes to London, and you can see the shortest one is via Ostend, or yeah, so there are 2 routes from Ostend, so they're quicker than taking the Calais-Dover route. Right. So that's and there's an even longer one, which is Boulogne-Folkestone, because, and you can count the hours that it would take from Brussels to get there. I can sort of imagine this in maybe a company headquarters, maybe not a railway company even. So I can imagine a corporation buying this sort of for their secretaries to refer, so they'd know it would take 10 hours to get to London, 8 hours to get to Cologne or something. It was quite so it was an easy way to tell their employees how they could get around.
I love it.
I have a question for you as well, Laurence, because until that last question from Tom, I'd been thinking entirely about military mobilization maps or the time sheets prepared by the Prussian General Staff, where France and Germany in the 1860s were doing competitive railway mobilizations. year after year after year with each class of conscripts, and obviously a mobilization conflict won in 1970 by the German railway system. Do you think there's any kind of military aspect to this, or is it entirely commercial?
I've read every bit of text on the map, and there's not a trace of that. And at the bottom right, it says on sale in, I can't remember exactly what it says, but it says it's certainly generally on sale in the major bookstores and in the main stations of Belgium. So that indicates to me it's for civilian use.
Well, that's a nice simple outcome, isn't it? Unless Bismarck was sending various people to Brussels stations.
Yeah, interesting. So have you seen diagrams showing these mobilizations, or simple maps, or have they been geographic maps?
What they tend to be is very, very long, boring lists of numbers. Mm-hmm. But they, because it was done by the engineers, they got bored and they would start doing sketches as better ways of showing how many men could be got into so many carriages and transported such a distance in a certain time.
Right.
So the distance time equation was what got me going.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Oh, I'd love to see them if you can share some images.
John Docker would like to know if there's anything on the Verso, and then after that, Mark Monnier is going to come in with a quick question.
No, completely blank.
Okay, there you go, Mark.
Oh, I should mention there are 2 copies that are very well digitized in the KBR, the Royal Belgian Library. I can pass the links to anyone who's interested. And I believe there's a copy in the British Library as well.
Mark?
Well, I've never seen anything like this, but it reminds me of some of the writings by Edward Tufte, a statistician and a political scientist who's written quite a bit about the mapping of data. Tufte has a scheme for transportation schedules where he uses a 2-dimensional graph with time along one axis and distance along the other. And he has stations along a railway labeled along the distance axis. And where you have a faster train, you have a steeper slope. And if a train makes a long pause, you basically have a temporary flat line. You might want to get in touch with him. I think he might be interested in this.
I sure will. Yeah, I'm very interested in those maps myself, those charts myself. They sometimes attributed to Etienne Jules Maré, who I mentioned, but Maré himself attributes them to an engineer called Ibri in the 1840s. And I don't think any of them, there are examples from the 1840s that have survived, but there is a Russian example from the 1850s. But they're fascinating, those plots, I agree. And this is a different way of showing pretty similar data. It'd be interesting to explore this for modern data or different data as well. And
this is Tingle time.
Yeah, sure.
Could those who have contributed extra bits of information put it into the chat or contribute to others in some such way that it can be picked up on?